I'm Valerie Price, and I would like to welcome everybody to our event this evening. This is Act for Canada, as most of you know. Evelyn Schachter, where is she? She's always greeting everybody. She's my social angel. Evie and I started this 2 years ago, as most of you probably know, and we're growing. Not as quick as we'd like to, but anyhow, we do our best. We have two really special speakers tonight, and we're really, really honored to have them. I'm not going to be the one introducing them. I'm going to call on Fred Litwin, who has come down from Ottawa and brought our two speakers, Bruce Bawer and Hege Storhaug. Did I pronounce it right? Hege? Close. Fred Litwin runs a free thinking film society in Ottawa, and you might all remember the episode when he was trying to show the film Iranian, and the Iranian government decided that they would shut it down. And so Fred is one of our warriors, he's one of our fighters, and he decided that he was not going to take no for an answer. So we love Fred, we love everybody who fights for freedom and freedom of speech and all the things that our country represents. So with no further ado, I'm going to present to you Fred Litwin, who kindly has brought Bruce and Hege down from Ottawa.
Thank you very much. Bienvenue. My French is quite rusty, so I'm sort of speaking to you in English. I started the Free Thinking Film Society back in 2007, largely because of Michael Moore. Back at that time, Fahrenheit 9/11 was playing everywhere in Ottawa, and repertory cinemas and first-run cinemas everywhere. And there was a small filmmaker in the United States who made a film called Michael Moore Meets America. And I wanted to see the film. And so I sent an email to the local theater in Montreal and said, would you bring this film in, please? And they came back and said, well, you know, the film's not quite right for what we show, you know, it won't work for us. And it dawned on me that the only way I could actually see that film was to bring it and show it. And so I got a few friends together and we started to think about bringing in films, and by the time we got our act together, the first film we brought in was Obsession, about radical Islam. And I went and hired a cinema to show the film, and about 2 weeks before the film was going to be shown, it was a private cinema.
What year?
It was back in 2007. I got a phone call from the manager of the cinema saying, have you gone through the film board? You know, in Ontario there's like a censor board. She said, you need to get this approved before you can show it. And I said, well, really? I was a little nervous. So I said, no, I haven't. So I called up the Ontario censor board, or the classification board, and they said, no, you don't need, it's a documentary, so you don't need approval, you can just show it. And by that time I got an email came in from the manager saying, well, you know, we're canceling your film because a retired professor from Carleton sent her an email saying that the movie maligns Muslims. And so we're canceling your film, come in and get your refund. 2 weeks. So, you know, fortunately I managed to get some publicity in the Ottawa Sun, found another venue, but it was much more expensive. But with the added publicity, I sold out the house, and I felt like actually sending chocolates to that retired professor. She sort of did me a favor. We started showing films, and every 2 or 3 months we'd show a film, and then I used to have coffee with my friend James, who was filming over there, and we decided let's actually bring in a speaker. And but who should we bring in? You know, who's really, really important, and who really is something we really, really would like to see. And at that time, we had just finished reading While Europe Slept by this guy, Bruce Bawer. And to us, it was sort of a bit of a dream. Like, is it possible? Could we really get him to come up to Ottawa and talk? And how do we get hold of him? And it was a whole new thing. So it didn't take long, but finally got in touch with Bruce and organized it, and brought Bruce 2 years ago to Ottawa. And it was a remarkable event. We went to Montreal, went to Quebec City, and had a great time. And since then, Bruce has written another book, Surrender, which you could buy at the back of the hall later on, which is also a great book. Bruce is a very, very important intellectual. He's a social commentator par excellence. He's written many books. You can see his articles in Pajamas Media, City Journal, a whole variety of different publications in print and on the web. And there's a reason why people want him to write for them. There's no one else who can write quite like Bruce. Bruce was living in Norway right now, and he saw the threat firsthand, which is really what makes him such a powerful speaker and such a powerful writer. So we can please welcome Bruce Bawer.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Valerie. It's great to be back in Ottawa. It's great to see all of you here, especially old friends like Mark and David. In the year 2000, the Partisan Review published the first thing that I ever wrote about Islam, and it was an essay entitled "Tolerating Intolerance: The Challenge of Fundamentalist Islam in Western Europe." As a result of its dispersion on the internet, it came to the attention of a lot of people who never would have seen it otherwise, and one of them was Hege Storhaug. And after reading the essay, she wrote me an email suggesting that we meet. And I was already familiar with Hege's name because she had written an article in Norway's biggest newspaper that had made me aware that I was not the only writer living in Norway who was concerned about the spread of Islam in Europe and about issues relating to immigration and integration. Well, I did meet Hege, and we became collaborators, we became friends, and I feel honored to be able to call such a woman my friend. Hege began her career as a journalist, and when she was a novice reporter, she was stunned to discover that many of the young women who resided in her own city, the capital of supposedly liberal Norway, were effectively without rights. They lived essentially as family property, as serfs, in sprawling clans that strictly controlled their movements and told them whom to marry. Many of them were denied access to education and were prohibited from learning the language of the country in which they lived. Beatings were common, and so was sexual abuse. Though many of these young women had been born in Norway and were Norwegian citizens, they had no more freedom, practically speaking, than if they had lived in one of the remote Pakistani villages in which their families had originated. Hege's discovery of these systematic atrocities, which at that time were not anywhere near being headline issues, led her to spend a long period of time in Pakistan, the homeland of Norway's largest Muslim immigrant group, where she learned firsthand about the social and cultural predicament of Muslim women and girls. That experience led to her writing a book entitled Mashallah, A Journey Among Women in Pakistan in 1996. It also led to the founding of an organization called Human Rights Service in 2001. Hege, along with Vida Carlson, a researcher and statistician, started Human Rights Service in order to study multi-ethnic and multi-religious communities in Norway and to come up with proposals to improve government policy relating to these communities. During the years since Human Rights Service was founded, the problems that Hege first noticed all those years ago have, as many of you realize, grown ever more urgent, and more Norwegians have recognized just how urgent those problems are, even as their politically correct leaders have continued to turn a blind eye. During these years, in a series of illuminating, in-depth reports based on solid facts, Human Rights Service has heightened public awareness of these problems and has formulated policy proposals that have shown a way forward. The Human Rights Service is not technically speaking a service organization. Its work has taken Hege and her colleagues into Muslim homes and into the lives of Muslim women who have undergone terrible abuse at the hands of their families. They have a broad network of Muslim and ex-Muslim contacts. They know what is wrong out there and why. And they have made a difference at the highest levels. Their policy proposals have resulted in major legislation in both Norway and even more so in Denmark. Yet despite its influence, Human Rights Service has always been controversial. In a nation where public criticism of Islam or of Norway's immigration policy has long been considered revolting. Still, thanks In large part to Human Rights Service's efforts, discussion of these matters has gradually become more acceptable. And as these issues came increasingly to the fore, Hege became an increasingly visible presence on television and radio in Norway. And as she grew more prominent, it became clear that while a very large proportion of the Norwegian public greatly respected her because she told the unvarnished truth about things they themselves had seen and experienced, but that they hardly dared speak of themselves. Norway's left-wing political, media, and academic establishment considered her a threat to its politically correct orthodoxy and to its power. As a result, we have a state of affairs in Norway in which Norwegian Muslim leaders who have refused to distance themselves from even the worst aspects of Sharia law are welcomed as honored guests in the halls of the Norwegian parliament, or hired as columnists by major Norwegian newspapers, and are invited to give speeches at leading Norwegian academic institutions, while their critics, with Hege and Human Rights Service in the forefront, are treated by many members of the cultural elite as pariahs, branded as racist and Islamophobes, simply for speaking the truth about what these Muslim leaders believe and what kind of society they seek to create in Norway and elsewhere in the West. And the cultural elite is not alone. Norway's imams, the army of spokespeople for Norwegian Islamic organizations, and the moral police, as they're called, who enforce religious orthodoxy in Muslim neighborhoods, also recognize Human Rights Service as a threat to their power. Both Norway's cultural elite and its most influential Muslims, then, have long shared the goal of bringing down Human Rights Service. As a result, ever since they founded the organization, Hege and her colleagues have been the target of vicious name-calling and mendacious accusations from various quarters. After all, if you can't beat them in a fair debate about the facts, just keep labeling them racists and Islamophobes and making personal attacks. In the summer of 2009, the enemies of Human Rights Service came closer than ever before to bringing it down. It started with a Norwegian Somali woman who in the fall of 2008 published a book about gender inequality and child abuse in her community. The book received a lot of media attention, and the woman was soon working with Human Rights Service. But that winter she left, and a few months later in newspaper interviews she began to level a series of absurd charges. For example, she claimed that Hege had forced her to drink vodka, eat pork, and to look at pictures of acts of bestiality. As it turned out, Rita had taped all of her conversations with them, and the tapes which Human Rights Service shared with reporters proved that everything this woman said was pure invention. Yet the reporters chose to ignore the tapes and continued to pass on this woman's pathological lies as if there were substance to them. Ultimately, Norway's Socialist Minister of Children, Equality and Social Inclusion, write that down, Minister of Children, Equality and Social Inclusion, who is an enemy of Human Rights Service and who had plainly been waiting for just an opportunity, used this woman's fabrications as an excuse to try to deny funding to Human Rights Service. He announced that the ministry had commissioned a report which, when released, would doom the organization. But in the end, the report concluded that the woman indeed was a liar. Yet because this conclusion was not what the minister or the media wanted, the report was shelved. The liar was protected. Human Rights Service was denied official exoneration. Human Rights Service then survives, but so do its enemies. The upside of all this is that while Norway's cultural elite plots the destruction of Hege Storhaug and Human Rights Service, the Norwegian people, in ever greater numbers, recognize her as a national hero, a champion of the values that they cherish and that they recognize more and more as being endangered. Ladies and gentlemen, Hege Storhaug.